point of no return is a concept, even beyond the name of a movie, borrowed from aviation, which marks that position beyond the point of takeoff, at which, as a function of aircraft capabilities, such as aircraft type and fuel, environmental considerations such as wind speed and altitude, where the flight can no longer return to safety at its point of origin and must proceed to some other destination before a limited timeline of restricted resources is consumed. The Hollywood production Apollo 13 was essentially a dramatic portrayal of such an operational problem, where astronauts aboard the spacecraft and officials at flight control work together to extend the capabilities and resources available in a concerted effort to extend the point of return beyond a point at which return to Earth was made possible again, under conditions where failure was not an option and at a time when no American had ever been lost in space during the in-choate years of a nation's attempt to reach for the stars toward a new and final frontier, to reach for the moon, not because it was easy, but because it was hard. Hello, my name is Major Mike Webb, and if you have been watching the news regarding the winding down of a public health crisis that finds over 55% of adult Americans and over 43% of all Americans fully vaccinated, including children, less than half the stated goal of herd immunity announced by the president just months ago, what had been termed as strictly science with no place for politics has begun to transform into an international diplomatic problem as world leaders convene for a G7 summit at the beach resort Carbis Bay Hotel near St. Ives in Cornwall, a region seen as central to the United Kingdom's Green Technology Center, a meeting of the 7 largest advanced economies in the world, including the United States, the United Kingdom, France, Germany, Italy, Japan, and Canada. The geographic location for the summit was at the option of the current president of the Group of 7, placing the conference in the United Kingdom. After the world public health crisis, it was deemed urgent that the world leaders not convene virtually, but rather in person, to discuss primarily a stronger global health system that can protect us from all future pandemics. And so for the next few moments, for those who are not in the habit of following international politics or geopolitical strategies beyond their newsfeed or information silos, we shall attempt to outline some aspects of the historic meeting beyond the echo chambers within the context of the current public health crisis and other international and domestic events that affect it. Probably the most obvious of curiosity-inspiring facts about the G7 summit is that it is not a G8 conference and does not include the nation of Russia, which had joined shortly after the dissolution of the Soviet Union in 1998, around the time that the Beijing government was acquiring its first aircraft carrier from the salvage of that former communist nation for a retrofit that would take over a decade to complete. However, after the invasion of Crimea by the Russians in 2014, that nation was expelled, coincidentally around the same time that the former Soviet aircraft carrier was finally first launched by the People's Liberation Navy in China, fully retrofitted, a project that took over a decade. The Beijing government would not acquire its second aircraft carrier until December 2019, around the same time that a pneumonia of unknown etiology began to emerge in the central mainland, now under suspicion of having originated in the military-grade virology institute in Wuhan. A second aircraft carrier that provided the Beijing government naval dominance when 2 aircraft carriers owned by the United States nuclear aircraft carriers were struck with an outbreak that, at least coincidentally, caused not only our loss of sea power in the Sino-Pacific, but also the withdrawal of our forward deployed strategic bombers on Guam. Some may recall concerns regarding reports about a Russian attack submarine recently, equipped with cruise missiles, equipped with supersonic missiles capable of delivering a nuclear payload and stalking at the coast of the United Kingdom at the beginning of the summit. All reports confirm that an international joint task force had cooperated to create a ring of steel to protect the waters. It's extending at least 14 miles beyond the beachfront shores where the summit was being held. It has not, however, been confirmed that the Russian Navy had, in fact, signaled any signs of intentional aggression or even military presence in the vicinity. It is of note that even before 1998, despite boasting a population of over 1 billion, and before a pandemic declaration, an economy that had been erecting as many as 14,000 impressive-looking skyscrapers per year, it was not until around 2016 that the Hubei province, and especially Wuhan, the location of the Detroit of China, or its automotive production, that the People's Republic of China for the first time became recognized as primarily an industrial economy, and not chiefly an agrarian one. However, the trillion-dollar One Belt, One Road project connecting Central Asia and Africa with the infusion of over $900 billion from the China Development Bank alone had begun to shape China's influence in the regions of the world, primarily lesser developed nations, like Indonesia, with whom it has enjoyed a growing relationship for the past decade. And even though that nation was able to triumphantly announce the total elimination of COVID-19 in September 2020 without even administering or developing one vaccine, at the present, both Russia and the Beijing government have been outperforming even the United States in marketing their vaccines to lesser developed nations, to whom just recently the president had announced an intention to donate over $500 million of the Pfizer vaccine, while Secretary of State Anthony Blinken has indicated that he will be exerting pressure with the international community to gain full access to the laboratory in Wuhan, which he claims to believe is the only way to resolve the mystery of the origins of a novel coronavirus. So, beyond international tensions, as the Group of Seven attempts to exert its global influence and show a united front, what are some additional problems with their stated goal to discuss primarily a stronger global health system that can protect us all from future pandemics within the context of a point of no return? One suggestion is that while the world leaders impress the urgency of convening in person, it is significant that each participant was yet required to be tested for infection, not only signaling a lack of trust, but specifically on the concern that one participant might infect the others with a less than 5% infectious pathogen, which is 4 times too low in statistical significance to be validated as an infectious disease being transmitted from person to person. And at least in composite risk management, in order to prevent any risk or harm, one must first have a pretty comprehensive understanding of what that risk is. And in an evidence-based inquiry, one can only conclude that a less than 5% infectious upper respiratory tract infection pathogen can only be deployed to achieve pandemic status, a determination that had been made by top U.S. officials over a year ago when the decision was made to use the Defense Production Act and the Emergency Use Authorization procedure to develop and deliver the vaccines that the president now intends to donate to lesser developed nations. Beyond the concern that the Secretary of State is not aware of the pandemic potential or lack thereof for a novel coronavirus, compelling him to demand that the Beijing government grant him full and complete access to the laboratory in Wuhan is yet another fact about which he should be aware as the director of the State Department and our Foreign Affairs. It took the Beijing government as long as a decade to agree to deposit accession documents to the United Nations Biological Weapons Convention, not agreeing to join at least 94 other civilized nations around the world in rejecting biological warfare in joint proclamation. And even by August 2019, the State Department that he heads had concluded that the Beijing government had not yet destroyed the biological munitions that it had held before 1984. As the Secretary of State, he should be aware that a note of clarification was attached by diplomats to the accession document stating that the Chinese government considers that the convention has its defects, and noting that it fails to provide in explicit terms for the prohibition of the use of biological weapons and the concrete and effective measures for supervision and verification, and it lacks forceful measures of sanctions in the procedure of complaint against instances of violation of the convention, and adding in diplomatic aspiration that it is the hope of the Chinese government that these defects may be made up or corrected at an appropriate time. It is significant that for years, both the governments of China and Iran have consistently been found in violation of the principles of the Biological Weapons Convention, but lacking a formal procedure, there's been no means to correct those violations. And the Secretary of State should know that. Or perhaps, like CDC Director Rochelle Walensky, when she was invited to testify before the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence to provide her position on the laboratory origins of a novel coronavirus last month that has contributed to the deaths of almost 600,000 Americans in the deadliest year in American history, closing businesses, schools, and churches, and causing confusion, fear, and despair amongst many, even some so fearful of a deadly disease that has been from the very beginning validated to demonstrate less than a 2% case fatality rate, compared with the case fatality rates as high as 35% for SARS, that they refuse to seek urgent care at emergency rooms in greater fear of dying from a novel coronavirus infection. In addition to the over half of fatalities to a novel coronavirus being found in the elderly in nursing homes, a known fatality risk from the beginning for whom World Health authorities had indicated resources were available to protect, but yet were ignored, like enhancing tracer contacts follow-up capabilities, the key factor for which the CDC had credited its success in the Ebola health crisis in West Africa, even by the nation's only physician serving as a state governor. The state, perhaps like this, Secretary of State, Mr. Blinken forgot to do his homework, or maybe it was just not classified at the time as homework in this point of no return. But President Joe Biden said in his Great American Rescue Plan, addressed to the nation, that he had met a woman in Pennsylvania who owned her own business, and that she had looked him in the eye and said that the only thing that she wanted, or that the American people wanted, was to know the truth. And telling Americans that he needed to get you vaccinated with an experimental treatment he now prepares to donate to lesser developed nations that was developed with no knowledge of the infectious dose it was required to prevent, and that it had been developed and delivered under the Emergency Use Authorization and the Defense Production Act, which cannot by law be used for a communicable disease being transmitted from person to person, but only a nuclear, radiological, chemical, or biological agent being deployed against a national security interest target. President Biden told you that he needed you without even a mandate, and encouraged you to persuade your family and friends who had not been compliant to achieve 80% herd immunity before the nation could return to normal again. But today, only over 43% of Americans, including children, have been fully vaccinated as the nation returns to normal again. And apparently that was good enough. And now, beyond your point of no return, just recall that he told you the truth, and you can handle the truth. This advertisement was authorized by Mike Webb. End of the day, I really don't give a damn. It's not my department. Honest. And y'all go back now. Here. Honest.